Okay, here we are. It's January 1 of 2019, and I've been doing a little bit of work with Fusion 360 over the last couple of weeks, get my head back into it, and I'm interested in making a jig and a fixture, and both, for one of the versions of the Ringmaster control line airplane. Because if I have a fixture to set up my ribs and get the leading edge into it, and et cetera, trailing edge, and whatever cap strips and things like that, it could be a lot easier. I'll just mount it on a board and then hang it vertically out of the way when I'm not going to use it. So I had downloaded the Ringmaster plan off the internet. This is a modernized version of it, I'm told, within the last 5 years or so. I have to look at the date on this. But somebody did a nice CAD drawing of this. It'd be nice if I actually had the CAD drawing, come to think of it. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to put this into Fusion 360 so I can play around with it anyway. And as we take an edge-on look at the plane, we can see that the root rib, which is actually down the center of the wing, not really the root, at the outside part of the profile fuselage, but it's actually broken into two different pieces because of this like pre-established webbing that this design uses, which is kind of neat. I thought I'd give this a try. And then if I get a fixture set up for this, for the wing jig for this, then I could just modify it for other versions of the Ringmaster. So this, I'm pretty sure, would not be old time worthy or old time eligible if you're going to enter a contest or not. This design here. Okay, so what I wanted to do was enter this into Fusion 360 so I can make myself a bunch of templates with this in order to cut ribs. Yes, I do have a CNC machine, but I've yet to get it rigged well enough to cut ribs in balsa, which would be pretty easy. But I'm thinking that honestly would take me about a month of free time to be able to get that going, and it's easier just to sit here with a bunch of 3D printed outlines for the ribs and just cut them myself. So I'd want to go over this. This is the SVG problem, if you will call it that. I don't want to bash Fusion 360, but I've had problems with SVG. I think that it could be done a little bit better. I think that that the Fusion 360 should be able to let you enter your own scaling factor into the system so that it works on your own system. Because what I've read, well, first of all, it's a clunky process. I think that there should be some scaling control over it much better than what happens. So let me show you what happens. Okay, so if you take a look at the edge-on view of this Ringmaster, if we go and find the rib for that, it's right here. This is the one right down the center line. Okay, and there's a split in here because there's, as I said, right above it actually is shown these wing spars, which are almost like webbing already. And if you notice this design, it alternates high, low, high, low, high, low for the ribs. If you look at the ribs, W2 has a cut on the low, W3 has a cut on the top there. Right? So what I wanted to do is just be able to cut out the W0-A and -Bs. I just cut it out as one piece. All right. So I'm going to bring it over into Photoshop. So I come over to Photoshop, where do I find that? And I brought that in, and then I retraced that just using the pen. Really simple. I mean, I don't use Photoshop. It takes me about an hour and a half to get my head back into it again to be able to get the points here, control them, and I got a pretty nice, pretty accurate overlay on it. Okay. So what I had done was I had actually just taken a section of the PDF here. I selected actually, I bring the entire file into Photoshop. I don't have it up here right now because I've closed Photoshop since I've brought the entire file in. And I do a screen grab. I do a select with, not a screen grab, but a select of the rib that I wanted, which was this image here. Okay, so let me turn off the rib trace. Turn that off. I don't know if I can turn off a path on this. All right, maybe if I select outside there. Okay, that's the actual path that I set up, which is pretty nice. Well, anyway, I'll comment on a couple of things about symmetry there in a minute. So this I had brought in. I doctored it up by removing the text that was over on this. I just removed this. I think I removed, no, center slot's still there. Okay. All right. So I had drawn the rib over this. Now I want to get this into SVG so I can move it over to Fusion 360. Okay, which I do. Okay, so I've saved that as an SVG. Come over to Autodesk, or yeah, into Fusion 360 here, and I have inserted it here once, but I'm going to go through a clean startup here. So just for grins, I'm going to create my own new component here, and we're going to call this the actual center rib ringmaster. I think it's called SD. The gentleman's initials are SD. I think that is. Just call that the version of the ringmaster. Okay. All right. So we name that, and then we want to insert an SVG. And I'll pick up the file first, and I want that file is the one that is the output from Photoshop, and I'll put it on the XY plane here, okay? And this is what I'm talking about, that everybody runs into the problem of, okay? So for some reason, the location of this is located in the northwest corner of the file, okay? So the extent of the file, I believe, that's homed in on the origin here as the upper left on this thing. So what I'm going to get at is the scale of this thing. Okay, so how do we get this? If you watch other videos, they do little logos and things that have to fit on certain surfaces, so they can get them to drop in and scale it just for the surface that they're going to go in. The issue here is this is the only time I'm able to scale this image is when I'm bringing it in. All right, so it's kind of kludgy. It's like an area that needs work in Fusion 360, which is incredible and super and really excellent. But when you go to do these SVGs, I've done another project with this, and now that I'm doing another second sort of significant project, if you will, I just ran into this. I thought I'd make the video to kind of explain here that what I've figured out is that I believe that the Photoshop is dealing with 96 DPI, and the file, however, is in 300 DPI, and there's some kind of meta information in that Photoshop file, the SVG, when it comes in, all right? And it's using, what it ends up doing is it ends up saying inside Fusion 360, it thinks it's 96 DPI when it's actually coming in at 300, because when I start using those numbers, what happened is that if you scale that, if I need to scale this down, let me just show you what the image looks like. I don't have a mouse running right now. Let me roll out a little bit here. Okay, I'm going to show you how large this thing comes in. It comes in like 3 times too big, and that struck me that the ratio of 96 to 300 was somehow involved there. And sure enough, what I did was I just divided 96 DPI by 300 DPI, like a screen resolution versus a print resolution, if you will. And that comes out to 0.32. Come back up here. If I scale it, for some reason, it is not allowing me to scale it. Let's move it over here. Something's going on. I don't know what happened. Insert it again. You don't get it. Okay, so for some reason it got into a funny place. Actually, you want to scale it first, I found. Okay, so 96 divided by 300 is about 0.32. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I don't want to drag this out too long, but I actually had to get to 0.319 to get this thing to match up to the original print. And it's still off by 11 thou as far as a distance of approximately 10 inches goes. It's a little bit scaled wrong, but 11 thou over 10 inches is not going to hurt what I'm doing here. So actually, you can see the preview there. And before I hit enter, then I'll move it back here to work with it around the origin, okay? And all I'm going to do is drop that in. And I thought I'd mention that. I think that's part of the key here, but I do believe Fusion 360 could be better in this realm because so many people bring in their art from Illustrator or from something else as an SVG. And I've seen several videos, and none of them are covering, some of them just cover, oh yeah, generally if you throw it down on a surface, I'm sure that they practiced the video beforehand and they got a scale that worked for them and they dropped it in, but they didn't talk about the scale. I think this is the key, and I even had to tweak it from the actual, and it's actually 0.32000 is the ratio. I mean, 0 is all the way out, whereas I had to come down by just 1 thou scale here, 0.319 instead of 0.32 to get it to work for me. When I do that and I hit enter, that looks good. Let's take a look at how big that is. I'll show you the dimension. Let's do an inspect on this. Can I fit it? Yeah, I think we can get it in here, right? And we'll do an eye for inspect. I'm going to check from edge of the very end of the trail. Oh, how do I get rid of this guy? Get him out of the way for a sec. And I'm just going to measure. This is the point that I measured to. And here we get 9.261, which is 24 thou off. I'm sorry, it was 9.25 is the actual dimension in the on the original drawings, 9.25 when I printed that out, which I'm happy with. This has 11th thou error. That's the 11th thou I talked about before. It's just a smidge longer here, a little bit bigger. And you can play around with the numbers if it matters to you. But, if you're trying to make a mechanical part by starting with Illustrator, you're not going to get a specific dimension. But when you try to do something like I'm doing and take just a drawing from PDF all the way through to SVG into Fusion 360, this is what you're going to have to deal with. And I hope if anybody else has a better way to do this, or if there's a track on some kind of lead on a fix for Fusion 360 or some other methodology. But I've watched a bunch of videos. I've done this and actually printed some nice things playing around with the scale. But in this case, I have to have this thing pretty accurate to actually come out the right size. Hope that helps.